Good morning to everybody who joined us just now. Today we're delighted to welcome Keiko Schleibach, who is the founder of English Empowered, and she works also as an English communication coach in Boston. Keiko coaches Japanese academics and business persons who work internationally. She helps them not only develop their English speaking skills, but also create compelling presentations for their American partners and counterparts. We're going to talk about becoming a confident English user as a non-native speaker of English today. And it's an important topic because Japan is going to open even more for foreign expatriates, and many of them will not be speaking the language. So we believe that many of them will be actually will start learning the language after they come to Japan. They will probably never, this is I'm talking about Japanese, but at the same time, a lot of Japanese people and business persons, let's say academics, will also strive to learn English, to be more fluent, and to use it in a better way so that they can communicate in English. And I'm sure that I think that probably most of us now in the room, or probably everybody here, speaks at least one foreign language. So, we would like to talk about challenges and, overcoming those challenges. Also, let me tell you that Keiko is, she has to leave the room at 9 o'clock sharp. So we're going to close the room by 9 o'clock. So if you have any questions, just come up on stage and let's talk about your experience of learning English or Japanese or any other foreign language. But of course, before that, Keiko. So let's see, just what was the biggest challenge to you when you were studying English as a foreign speaker, of course? I mean, you're very fluent nowadays, but well, for everybody, there is a beginning, and the beginning is always hard.
Sure. Hi. Last time we talked about communication skills and how to adjust your communication style to the target culture. And that's also, that's very important. And, learning presentation skills is very important. But to me, like mindset is as important as these skills to be an effective communicator. And, I want to talk about being comfortable using English as a non-native speaker of English, because I feel like that just affects everything. Like that affects your action, basically, right? So my experience is, I love English. I loved learning English all my life. And as you know, Tim, I went to ICU and I loved it. And I was an exchange student, and I was so excited to come to the United States and use English. And my housing situation was I lived in a house with 40 people, and 90% of them was native speakers. They're Americans, basically, and a few Japanese people and a few people from other countries, but mostly native speakers. And, you would think that was a dream situation for me. But it really wasn't like a dream. It was really hard, you know. I wish I could have enjoyed it a little bit more now that I, think about it. But I was in LA, and it was a big campus. So we had to take this shuttle to go to dinner at the cafeteria with all the housemates. So we would take the shuttle and go to dinner and have a conversation as a group. And I just couldn't be part of it. Like I learned English all my life. I was doing fine at ICU. And I just couldn't, catch up with the conversation. Everything was different, the topics, the type of humor or, sarcasm or the pace. It was just so difficult. And, I had a hard time. I didn't want to show the world that my English was not good enough, or I didn't want to remind myself that I'm not good enough, So I had a hard time. But then I came back to the States to go to graduate school, and things were a little bit better. I was in the TESOL program, teaching English to speakers of other languages. So most of my classmates are English teachers. So I felt safe, right? I'm sure people at, the other exchange program, they were nice too, but in my head, I felt more comfortable to talk to these English teachers. But I still kind of felt this inferior complex almost. I felt inadequate. When I talk to native speakers, I would feel nervous. And I felt like I had to almost prove myself, to these native speakers. And I couldn't just, enjoy the conversation with them. And so that went on for a while. And I would say to myself at the end of the day, like, why is my English not good enough? Like, I've spent so much time. Why is it not like native speaker level? And one day I was riding the bus with Dr. Brown, and Dr. Brown is one of the most famous, most wonderful professors in TESOL. And we were riding the bus together. We're shadow buddies. And we were talking about something, and he said something to the effect of, I get a sense you are not from here. And he didn't mean anything by it. He didn't say it in a bad way. But I felt awful. I thought, oh, I was doing such a bad job speaking English. He knows English is not my native language. So he saw my reaction and he was like, hey, you don't have to feel bad. It's great you are from Japan, and you're doing great taking these classes and teaching English. And it was that moment when I realized I had kind of been ashamed that I'm not a native speaker, and that's when I realized, oh, you don't have to be a native speaker. My English is good enough to do what I want to do, so that shift in perspective like completely changed how I see the world, if you know what I mean.
I'm
So
glad it did. I'm glad it did because I listen to you speak English and I'm in awe of you. I mean,
you're
it's
too kind.
amazing how good your English is, and I understand how humbling how humbling it could be to be thrown into a situation where people are all speaking a language that's not your native language. um but I think there's something positive about being humbled. I think there's it because it pushes it, in your case it pushed you forward to improve yourself and to reflect and think about where you were at, and in the end it made you, I think, a wiser, as it does with everyone. When you learn a foreign language, I think it expands your mind. It destroys um, preconceived notions that come from your culture, and I think it really, again, as I said, I think it makes you a smarter person. So hats off to you. That's great.
Yes, I agree with you about that. It's it's amazing, really. And I remember, I think that I can relate to that experience, Keiko. But for me, it was a
Yeah.
little bit different. When I was studying English back home, I really, because I had been studying it, for years in school before I went to university. But when I actually started studying in university, and I really wanted to get fluent in speaking, not just reading or, reading comprehension. So, and I started, looking for opportunities to talk with, English speakers, even though they were not native English speakers. But the one opportunity which came up was, an agency which was actually doing international business meetings, and they also had in summer they had cultural tours for British tourists. So I became a guide there. I studied, and and so on, and it was really fun. But the first summer when I was still a trainee there, it was so very hard. It was really, I mean, because I could understand everything I heard, and I just, it the language was inside of me and I couldn't speak. So it was really tough.
But yeah, and I pushed myself so very hard, and I got dreaming. I dreamt in English at that point, because the words, I wanted them to come out and they didn't. So I guess that it was the only way for for my brain, to get some release. And it was really funny. But yeah, that's for me, that's how I actually became fluent in English. So, but I don't know, Tim, you have your, well, second language is Japanese, so I guess well, you've got a different, well, I'm sure you've got a different story, and Japanese is so much different uh, for you and me, I mean, from the Indo-European languages, because both Bulgarian and English are Indo-European. So unlike, well, let's say Japanese is different, it belongs to a different family. So what's your story with the Japanese language?
Well,
Oh,
I
well,
mean, yeah, I understand the struggles Keiko is describing,
Mm.
and the same, embarrassment and not wanting to make a mistake, and
yeah.
I had to get over that, and I got over it just by hanging out with Japanese friends all the time. I was like completely immersed for like 7 years. I lived with a Japanese roommate. I went to school at Waseda, and so it was all Japanese from morning till late afternoon. I go back. I'm hanging with my Japanese friends at the bar, and like you said, it was I started dreaming in Japanese, which is but I always, even now, I still have a complex. I always feel like I can get better, and that I'm going to be studying Japanese for the rest of my life. But to that point, I find that there's a parallel between creating presentations, especially for a mixed audience, Westerners and Japanese. And if you're in the Japanese corporate world like I was in the US, nearly every presentation that you give, you have a mixed audience. And so there's this delicate balancing act, and it's just like translation. Um, I'm helping a friend translate something now, and it's such a challenge to try to capture the essence of the meaning and still render it into English that sounds natural. And it's even harder if it's copywriting, like for advertising or something like that, which I've dabbled in. And it's just such a difficult job because that's really about presentation. And if you're translating from Japanese, you're always questioning yourself, saying, am I wandering too far from the original Japanese? Because if I put the original Japanese more into more direct terms, it's just going to sound like nonsense and not be effective. So I guess my question for Keiko is, like, do you ever feel that challenge when you're presenting to a mixed audience and you're trying to find that delicate balance between, so you can appeal to both parts of the audience, the Japanese and the Americans? And I'll give you a really good example. So there's I've mentioned before that Japanese slides tend to be very busy and there's a lot going on there. And when an American looks at it, they just get overwhelmed, and there's lines and dotted lines and arrows, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. But there's also some wonderful Japanese slides that, even if they're written in Japanese, people who don't understand Japanese will understand them. So I worked for a Japanese guy who used to make these schedules, and he would put the months at the top, and then he would draw pictures of boats going from Japan to the U.S. and wherever that boat was, you could look straight up and see where it was in the schedule in terms of, we were shipping steel to Tennessee at the time, right? It was a brilliant way to present it. So I was always trying to look for things that both sides can understand and relate to and figure out what they can. And I still feel like it's an ongoing struggle for me.
That's a tough question, Tim. So when I help Japanese researchers, I usually approach I try to crystallize their message, like what they want to tell them, and try to not so much as, put it in a Japanese way or American way, right? They have something that they want to convey to the other audience, or the goal that they want to achieve by having this conversation with them. So I try to focus on that, the goal and the type of message that they want to convey. So I, have a conversation with the clients and see where they're coming from, learn about their background and learn about where they're coming from, their logic, and try to put it in a concise message so people can understand. Like, I don't know if this is answering your question, but I try to focus on the clarity of the message, like how it sticks, how it appeals to the people.
Yeah, and I tried too,
Mm.
but it's such a challenge. But
Yeah.
that's the point of it, I guess. And I appreciate anyone in the audience if you got input on this. It's really great to share these perspectives. Hopefully, I'm not the only one who struggles with this.
No. Well, I've had some trouble like translating. I've translated like Japanese researchers' papers to English, and I had a hard time, because of the structure difference and the, logic difference. Because Japanese doesn't have, subject, and it sounds good in Japanese. And when you try to translate it directly to English, it just doesn't work. It's not just a linguistic problem, but in Japanese, it somehow works when you say things like, things need to improve, or something must be done. Like, 何か、なんだ、取らなければいけないとか、when you hear it in Japanese, like 改善が必要である or something like that.
Yeah.
It sounds good in Japanese, but when you put it in English, it's something is missing, right? Like you need to be more specific. Like something needs to be done. Okay, who is going to take that action? Like what exactly needs to happen? So you reminded me of that struggle that I had translating the academic papers, or even when I'm working with Japanese researchers presenting, when they're preparing their speech, like they say things like that. And that particular thought doesn't translate well.
Yeah, and it's even harder, and this is a problem I recently had, and I actually posted this on LinkedIn. I'm helping a friend with a translation, and he's using the katakana English zero base kara. You know, we say a blank sheet of paper, I guess, is the most understood English you can put. And I actually Googled the term, and all the high-paid, highfalutin, to use Richard's terminology, consultants in like McKinsey are using that. But most, I found out based on this informal LinkedIn survey, most native speakers and non-native speakers aren't really familiar with that term. So then you're forced to come up with this explanation that might take a few more words than you wish it would, but you want to make sure that it's clear, then that everybody understands the concept being conveyed. And that's obvious. It's just, sometimes dealing with the Japanese English, which sometimes it's imitating, what's being said by English speakers, but sometimes Japanese will assign a different meaning to that term. than it was originally intended. So that's a challenge as well.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I saw your post. Hakushi something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was great. Like a lot of people answered that. It generated a lot of interest from both native speakers and non-native speakers. And what was interesting, people from New Zealand, Australia, UK, the US, everybody, not one person said, I'm familiar with that term, which really surprised me. I thought at least a few people would, but anyway, so those are just kind of some observations.
Yeah.
But I think that's some of the things that native speakers can be more cognizant about when they talk to non-native speakers, right? Like in Japanese, in English, or in any languages. If there are non-native speakers in the room, we don't have to use idioms or slang that they might not be familiar with. There's always a way to explain things in a simple way. Like native speakers might not really realize it, that they're using these idioms, but non-native speakers, like Japanese students, they spend years and years and years, going through these idiom books, So I feel like native speakers should put a little more effort into speaking simple language.
Yes, I agree with you. But it seems to be difficult because I think that if you have studied another language, a second language, you can be more cognizant, as you say, of the non-native speakers'
That's true.
struggles. But if you have just one language, if you're speaking only your native language,
Right.
and then it's really difficult to imagine how difficult it is for people who use that language as a second or a third one, how difficult it is for them to make sense of every single idiom, especially if they haven't heard the idioms, because there are, of course, new idioms coming up with new generations. Of course, there is also professional jargon and so on and so on. So it's really a very complicated matter, I think. And I mean, when we move in international settings, so when we have people who speak different languages as their, well, let's say native and second language, then I think that it's a little bit easier, or it's probably natural to expect, other people to be more considerate. But at the same time, with those who speak only their native language, it's a kind of a lost cause. I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but that's what I have observed during the years.
Yeah, that's spot on, Maya, because I worked for 30 years with Japanese companies in the U.S., and part of that, the first 5 was in rural Tennessee, and where nobody spoke anything but English, and it was all Southern English. And whenever like a Japanese person would give an idea, or not even a Japanese person, somebody would propose an idea, and people in the audience thought it wouldn't work, that the Southern boys would say, "That dog don't hunt," which means it's not going to work. And the Japanese are like, "That dog don't hunt, oh really?" They had no idea what they were saying. So I had to, translate. I don't think that idea is going to work. So there were a lot of those idioms. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example, Tim. I love it.
Yeah, and because this is the first time when I've heard this idiom, I mean, today, that dog don't hunt. And immediately in my mind, it's like, where is the dog? Which dog? And so on and so on. It's like, so I start looking around, and thinking of, oh, because I've got just a cat here,
And then there's the opposite. Like somebody on that thread that I posted made a really funny statement, because I made exactly the same mistake. So if you hang out with the Japanese a lot, you hear them often say plus alpha.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, oh, that must be a regular English word. And when I use it with Americans, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? What's plus alpha? So.
Yeah, exactly. Things that we naturally say without thinking, right?
Yes.
That's
But
great.
it's funny also because this plus alpha is like the jargon which the foreign community here in Japan uses, you know. I mean, because we all have heard this plus alpha in Japanese and we know what it means, right? So, and everybody actually uses it. I mean, all the foreigners whom I have talked with, you know, at some point of time
Mhm.
they say plus alpha in English. And for me, it's, well, the meaning is clear. But as Tim just said, I guess that if they go, you know, back home, that plus alpha would be like, what? For other people around them. So, yeah, that's interesting how community language forms, and there are some idioms which are used in certain communities. Of course, it's like in companies too. So, Tim talking about the zero-based, what's that approach? Or
Mm.
yes, used by the consultants in, let's say, McKinsey and other companies. Yeah.
Yeah, or just like, regular idiom, like, let's call it a day or something. And, what? Call what? Like things
Right.
that people naturally say. And, or like one of my actually classmates in graduate school, like somebody said to her, "What's up?" And she looked up, like,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah, that's a common one. Yeah, yeah.
like it's just you, yeah, like I guess what's up is a very, common expression, but like if you don't have to use those phrases, knowing that somebody is, still learning the language, I think it's a little bit of kindness, you know?
Yes. Yes.
And even simple like expressions that's Americans would consider aisatsu would be like, how is it going? How,
Yeah.
and not only could Japanese take that literally, but Americans don't even pronounce it correctly, or like, how are you doing? We say, how you doing? So how are you becomes haya. And the Japanese are like, haya? What does haya mean? So we don't even enunciate our English clearly. And again, it goes back to what Maya said. If you've never studied a foreign language, you're not really conscious of,
Right.
how you like want to, wanna, gonna, going to, gonna, have to, gotta, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Like we crunch all these words together. And the Japanese do it too in Japanese as well. Itte shimau, ichao, right? So
Right.
there's some similarities, but I think Americans are particularly we're not very good at enunciating and pronouncing things correctly. So it's got to be a challenge.
Yeah. What have you been up to? That's another hard one
Yeah,
for
yeah.
people to
You,
answer.
Well, I
Hard to
can.
catch and
Yeah.
hard to answer too.
Yeah.
how's it hanging? How's it
Yeah,
hanging?
exactly. What?
Yes, but it's also, you know, interesting how we non-native speakers of English believe that the more idioms we know and can use, the more confident it makes us. So it's, I don't know, it's really a strange phenomenon. And I would say it's not because Keiko, you mentioned that Japanese learners of English, they study a lot of idioms, right? There are books here in
Mhm.
bookstores with English idioms and so on.
Yeah.
But it's not only in Japan. I have noticed it back home in Bulgaria. A lot of people study
Mm.
idioms because they want to sound more native, and well, it gives them some confidence too. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And like even to English learners, they often study for TOEFL, right, to get a high score in TOEFL.
yeah,
And part of studying for TOEFL is learning a bunch of idioms. It's really important to know a lot of idioms because like in the listening section, like they directly ask for your comprehension of idioms. So it's not just to like be street smart, I guess. It kind of the knowledge of idioms is required to get a high score in an academic test.
right.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. But yeah, Maya, I agree with you. I mean, knowing idioms and slang,
Mm,
that helps you um, become part of that society, become part of that community, you know, it helps you, I think, boost your confidence as well as a speaker, and if you know these idioms, you don't have to think of everything word for word. You can just say like da 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 da, and then you can convey your message. So it makes you more fluent and makes you sound more like a native speaker, and people around you will look at you like you're fluent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it is helpful learning idioms, and
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And at the same time, because I've got some Japanese friends, and well, they study English. They sometimes, insist on speaking English when we are together. And I usually tell them that even if you don't understand the meaning of a phrase or an idiom, you should be able to ask for it. And if you're able to ask what the meaning is, then you're fluent enough to feel confident, speaking the language. And if you cannot, if you cannot remember a certain phrase, then if you can explain it in other words, it makes you fluent enough to be confident too. So, and while I agree that idioms are very important to give you confidence, it's also important to be aware of your, let's say, ability to ask and explain without using them. So, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's because, of course, there will be always phrases and words. I mean, as long as we're speaking a second or a third language, so there will be always something which we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So that's when, so I feel like many non-native speakers of English feel kind of inadequate, right, when they speak to native speakers of English. But I feel like Japanese people tend to feel that a little more strongly than people from other countries. And, of course, I have been guilty of that for the longest time, but I've also seen it in my Japanese students and, by teaching international students from all over the world. When students, so I used to work in an office, academic office, and students will come to me with their questions and problems, and students have things to say, and Japanese students usually have more advanced knowledge of English, right?
Yeah.
They know more advanced grammar than, many students. I mean, of course, it varies from student to student, but I've seen like beginner students who don't know how to spell their name or who don't know how to respond to how are you, right? Japanese students usually know how to do those things, even though they might say my English is not good. But anyway, so students will come to me, and some students, even if they don't know how to say things in English perfectly, they might just say it anyway with a lot of mistakes. Or some other students might just connect words that they know and try to convey the message. Or some other students revert to their own language. Like I've had a bunch of like Chinese ladies who would just shout at me, what they want to tell me. But Japanese students, they tend to not do that. Like these students, they have this message that they really want to tell me. So they do whatever they can to communicate it to me, right?
Yeah.
But like many Japanese students, they would like turn to their friend who is more fluent than them and ask them to like translate for them or something. Or they will pull out their electronic dictionary and try to, say it in grammatical English. I think it's consistent. Like, my English teacher colleagues would say like, Japanese students will never ask questions in class, but they always have great questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, they don't ask questions during class, but they would, come up to us and ask great questions. So I feel like there's something interesting and unique about the Japanese culture that makes them feel that way, that they're inadequate. And of course, I'm part of it. But I find it very interesting.
Yeah, maybe that's, well, as you say, culture, a cultural thing. And Well, I have noticed that, well, here in Japan, there is really very little tolerance for mistakes. So that's
Mm.
probably, well, it is expressed, in that perfect, or let's say constant, uh, what's that, struggle, to improve things. So, and always people here, they do that kaizen, the incremental changes and improvements and so on. And but generally speaking, people don't want to make mistakes here. And I don't know, maybe it's just my feeling, but I have talked with, some of my colleagues at work, and so their observations have been similar. Like, yeah, mistakes are not tolerated really here.
Yeah, Japanese often use the expression minus shiko, yeah, rather than plus shiko. And I think there is some truth in what you're saying, Maya. There's that the negative kaizen, negative driven kaizen mentality that rather than saying, "Hey, I'm getting better," you're saying, "Oh, I have so much to learn."
Yeah.
So that seems to be part of it. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I've never thought of kaizen in that way. Negative improvement, is that negative oriented?
Yeah, mentality, what you're focused on, what your shortcomings are rather than the progress you've made, and it goes back to after the Americans have a successful project, they have a pizza party. And when the Japanese have a successful project, they have a hanseikai.
Yes.
So I used to tell my clients, first have a pizza party and celebrate the success, and then have a hanseikai. I do both.
Perfect.
So,
Bicultural.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, it's something admirable, right? Like all the craftsmanship, in Japanese culture, like how beautiful these shokunin make their wagashi or osushi, or, like they spend years learning how to cut a fish in a proper way, or
Right.
like, perfection is in their blood, right?
Yeah.
So they're not willing to show themselves when they're still in progress. I feel like they want to show the perfect selves to the world. Like they don't want to show the imperfect selves.
Yeah. And they don't want to pat themselves on the back, but they also really appreciate when the customer, is happy. I think that's where the satisfaction comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. And it also, comes, well, makes me think about something else, like, well, about the, a different cultural feature here. Like, people don't usually talk about their hobbies if you're not really very close to them. But at the same time, when they get good enough, they feel comfortable at showing what they have achieved, then they do that. But until that point, there is very little talk about studying or learning to do something or to make something. So it's always there is, well, that I wouldn't say a struggle, but that effort to get to a certain level of perfection, as you say, Keiko, before you make yourself open to the others, or you show the others what you have achieved.
Yeah. And also, speaking a foreign language, it's like, they say language ego, right? Like it's like becoming somebody else. And, when you're learning a language, you can never be perfect. You never get there like in a day, right? So you're always somehow less competent or like not as eloquent as you are in your native language. And it threatens your ego, right? Who you are, your identity. And for Japanese people, I think English is, I'm sure it happens in any languages, but I feel like English is a special language for Japanese people compared to other foreign languages. Like at least I feel that way. Like when I'm learning Portuguese right now, and when I speak Portuguese, I really don't care how I sound. I don't care if I make mistakes. I mean, I don't care about English anymore, because I learned it's okay. I'm not a non-native. I'm not a native speaker, and I'm okay with that. But when I'm speaking Portuguese, I sound like, one of the students who just connect words that they know. Like, I don't have a lot. So I just connect, like, eu, vai, porque, like, I just connect the words. And, they might not understand me at all, but, I'm trying to communicate my message. And I feel like it's hard for many Japanese people to do that in English, because English is special. Like it's got a status kind of, and people spend so much time learning it. So like if you can't speak it to some extent, like it really threatens who they are.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I have noticed also one more thing to the point which you made about English, that it has a special status. So the
Yeah.
first one is that it looks to me that a lot of people here pay attention, a lot of attention to pronunciation, and not so much to the structure of the sentences. So what they first notice is your pronunciation of the language and the accent you have, and then comes the attention to the structure of the sentences which you use. So I have seen it at work. So basically, when we were considering moderators for an international business meeting last year, and it was like, oh, who can we get? Okay, we have that moderator. She has been doing that for 3 years, and yeah, she's good, but she speaks American English. And then this time we want somebody who speaks British English. And then, of course, there was another person, another candidate who is, I don't remember, maybe not Australian, but anyway. And it was like, how is their English? And they would say, it's beautiful. But the assumption was that it was beautiful not because it was correct. It was beautiful because it sounded this way or that way, which is really interesting to me. And it still strikes me, that many people think in that way here in Japan. This is the first.
I think Americans think that way too, though. Like a lot of the luxury car commercials in the U.S. are British English speakers because it sounds higher class.
Oh dear.
Yeah. And a friend from UK said that he described America and UK as two cultures separated by a common language. So I thought that was kind of funny. Very British.
Yeah, it's funny. I agree with you. But also to the point of other foreign languages here in Japan, I have heard a lot of people speak German or speak Spanish or speak Russian. And when I can, while I cannot, judge about German, their language, skills in German, I can tell you that their Spanish and their Russian, they're really very close to perfect. And those people whom I have heard speaking those languages, I mean, my Japanese counterparts or colleagues, they don't care, just like you, Keiko, when what you said about Portuguese. They feel very comfortable speaking those other languages, with exception, except English. But when it comes, because they are also good English speakers, when it comes to English, it's a very different story. So they're close to perfect, in other languages. But when it comes to English, even though their English is very good, they still feel a kind of, what's that, apprehension. So, and they're very careful when they use English. So probably that's because of the different status of the language here.
Yeah. So that's part of the reason, Maya, why I think it's so important to talk about this mindset. And I think it's so important for Japanese speakers who are learning English to just embrace the fact that we are not native speakers, right?
Yes.
Because if we feel that, inferior complex, or if we feel inadequate, it really limits our action, right?
Yes.
Like in a meeting, this is why we kind of hesitate to speak up in a meeting with native speakers, or when somebody talks to us and if we don't understand, like we feel bad just to say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Could you say that again? Like we would say that in Japanese, or,
Right.
but we feel like we should be able to understand it. And, we tend to pretend that we understand. But if we kind of let go of that ego, and we have to, like, that, how do I say, the pursuit of perfection, if we let go of that, you use the word liberated, Maya. And I thought that was a perfect word to explain that mental status. You will be liberated from all the constraints you've given yourself. You feel free to just do what you want to do and speak your mind,
Yeah. Without considering the language as a barrier. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it may be a matter of degrees, but I also experienced, the same feeling when I was learning Japanese. Of course, I'm still learning Japanese. It's an ongoing, condition, but, getting over the embarrassment of not being
Yeah.
perfect, of making mistakes. And then in Japan, from a foreigner's perspective, and it was more so in the old days than today, but even today, to a certain degree, some Japanese just do not want to accept that you can speak Japanese. And so even if they can't speak English and you say something to them in really, fluent Japanese, they'll answer you in, katakoto, English. And that even adds to it. It's like, oh, if I admit I don't understand something, now they're going to even speak English more to me. So that was always an ongoing challenge, more so in the old days, than today.
Yeah, I think that when we live in the country, Tim, you didn't live in Japan for quite a while, but you still had a lot of Japanese friends. So at some point of time, it's just you get used to it, I believe. And
Yes.
yes, and then there is one more factor which I believe is very important, and it is how the people, the native speakers of your non-native language, how they actually accept your making mistakes. Because it depends on the setting, it depends on the people you are using the language with. So I personally have this experience, of somebody telling me, it was years ago, but a native speaker, a Japanese person here in professional setting, when I tried to say something and I made mistakes, and they said, okay, we don't understand what you mean, so could you please speak in English? But their English was really minimal at that point, so which made no sense to me, but it felt really kind of, trying to minimize the other person, just because, despite of the efforts they were making, and it was really a kind of painful experience. So, but yeah, it happens. I mean, it's just, it also, just what I want to say is it depends on the situation and the person that you are using the language with. So, and yes, when other people are open and they are ready to embrace your mistakes too, not only you yourself, but the people around you, and to accept them. So it helps a lot.
Yeah, I've had that experience. I was lucky though. I had a lot of Japanese friends who didn't speak English. They didn't want to speak English, and they were very kind. But sometimes I had the opposite problem too, where they would not critique especially people that don't know you very well. So you say something the wrong way, they don't tell you you made a mistake, and now you continue making the mistake. And the exception is someone in your inner group in Japan, uchi to soto, right?
Yeah.
Somebody in your inner group, let's say like a Japanese wife or something, have no problem telling you you screwed up, which is good. That's
Yes.
how you improve, so I've seen it both ways.
Yeah. I mean, both situations are, well, they have happened, I believe, to almost everybody, or probably to everybody here. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you're learning a language, you're always self-conscious, right? You never forget the fact that like I mean, not never, but like you are aware that, you're speaking a foreign language and you want to do it well. So whatever response that you get from the other person, you notice. So I think as native speakers, I think just being aware of the fact that, people are trying and be open and be kind, I think that, makes a big difference.
Yeah. And I know we have lots of bilingual people in the audience. Who knows? Maybe
Yeah.
even trilingual. If anybody wants to come up on stage, we have to close up the room at 9. But you're welcome to come up now. We'd love to hear your perspective or your comments. Anything goes. So don't be shy, about coming up on stage.
Well, I think that quite a few people are shy or maybe busy, getting ready for work because it's Thursday. Thursday morning, it's a work day.
That is
So,
true.
yes. Right.
But yeah, I talk to my students about, when they're scared, to speak up with native speakers, I just reinforce the message that just embrace the fact that you're not a native speaker of English. And I encourage them to prepare as much as possible, right? Because that will make them confident. They are worried that they might go blank because they get too nervous, right? So they should prepare, not over prepare, but prepare enough. If you're going into like a meeting with an investor or something, or meeting with someone important from another company, you can do a little bit of research about them and make a short list about, some important facts about them, something that you have in common. Or, if you are going into a Q&A, you can anticipate questions in advance. So there are some, things that they can do to prepare themselves. So I think there are some tips if you're not confident enough because you're not a native speaker. I think there are things that, we can always do.
Yeah, those are great tips. And I think that you actually give some of them in your YouTube videos, right, Keiko?
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, in my YouTube channel, I introduce mama phrases. So these are fixed expressions that native speakers use in professional settings. So by knowing these phrases, we kind of talked about it earlier, it really helps with your fluency. And when you don't know what to say, you might just freeze or say something that you are familiar with. For example, when somebody says, "How are you?" you might feel tempted to say, "I'm fine, thank you." And you? But it doesn't sound very natural, and it doesn't really convey your desire to communicate with them. It doesn't really show that, so by learning some phrases that native speakers actually use, "Oh, great, how about you?" Or, like something more natural and something that conveys like more positivity and your friendliness, I think that'll help your communication at work or in any relationships.
Yeah, I highly recommend Keiko's YouTube channel. Keiko, just for
Thank
the
you,
folks
Jen.
in the audience, how can they find you on YouTube?
I believe Maya-san posted the link to my YouTube channel
Yeah.
on the LinkedIn post. So that's one way, and you guys can connect with me on LinkedIn. That'll be great, and I will send a message back to you.
Excellent. So let me say thank you very much to everybody who joined us. Keiko, thank you very much for your time and your tips, the great conversation today. We're looking forward to seeing you again. See you next time.